Sister stood up at my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner, tapped her champagne glass, and said, "And of course, we all know Jody's here too, the one who peaked in high school." The table laughed. My mother covered her mouth like she was trying to hide her smile. She wasn't. "My name is Jody. I'm 31. I'm the younger one, the shorter one, the one who moved back to our hometown after college and stayed quiet for a long time." According to my family, I was the one who couldn't make up her mind, the one who took the safe route, the one my mother described to her friends as still finding herself well into my late 20s, which was her polite way of saying she'd stopped expecting much. We were at Harvest Table, a restaurant downtown that my brother Bryce had rented out for the occasion. He was marrying a woman named Tiffany, which was fine. She was fine. The issue wasn't Tiffany. The issue was what happened every time my family got together and felt comfortable enough to perform. My sister Renee had been doing this my whole life. She had a talent for it, a specific skill for landing a joke at my expense in a room full of people, using the kind of tone that made it impossible to respond without seeming oversensitive. She was 34, a real estate agent, drove a white SUV with her face on the side of it. She was the one people in our family pointed to when they wanted proof that they raised someone right. My mother didn't stop her. She never did. What neither of them noticed that night was the woman sitting 3 seats down from my mother, on the far end of the table. She'd been quiet all evening, drinking water, watching. She had silver-streaked hair and wore a blazer the color of slate. She wasn't family. She wasn't a friend of the bride. I'd seen her walk in with Bryce's business partner and assumed she was someone's plus one. I was wrong about that. When Renee said it, I felt the familiar pull in my chest. Not quite pain. More like recognition. The way you recognize a pothole you've driven over so many times you've stopped expecting the city to fix it. I smiled the way I always smiled. Politely. Like it didn't land. But the woman in the slate blazer stopped smiling entirely. Humiliation doesn't come from one dinner. It accumulates. It starts small enough that you don't even notice you're carrying it. Growing up, Renee was the one with the plan. She knew what she wanted at 16: sell houses, make money, have a brand. My mother admired that kind of certainty. She repeated Renee's accomplishments at every family gathering like prayer beads. Renee closed 3 listings this month. Renee got her broker's license. Renee is thinking about opening her own office. When people asked about me, my mother would pause just long enough to make the pause mean something. "Jody's always been more of a behind-the-scenes person," she'd say, which sounded kind but wasn't. I graduated from University of Michigan with a degree in civil engineering. I spent a year doing fieldwork in the Southeast, then took a junior position at a mid-sized infrastructure consulting firm in Atlanta. It was contract work, mostly government projects, and it came with strict confidentiality requirements. Federal contracts, nothing I could put on a Facebook post, nothing that translated into a story my mother could tell at Thanksgiving. So I didn't try to explain it. I came home for holidays, helped clear the table, answered questions about whether I was seeing anyone, and let Renee have the room. That was my choice. I want to be clear about that. I chose the quiet. I chose it because I'd watched what happened when I tried to speak up, and it was always worse than saying nothing. So I saved my words for the people who would listen. The trouble with saving things up is that eventually the account gets full. Renee had more to say that night. She always did. Once she had momentum. She started talking about the time I tried to launch a small side project in my mid-20s, a tutoring service for high school kids studying for engineering entrance exams. It hadn't gone anywhere. I'd done it for about 8 months before the consulting word picked up, and I didn't have time anymore. Renee treated it like a punchline. "Remember when Jody was going to be an entrepreneur?" she said, affecting a dreamy voice. She had business cards printed and everything. More laughter. My brother looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. His fiancée Tiffany studied her salad. My mother refilled her wine. I looked down at the bread basket. Then I heard a chair scrape. Not loudly, just the quiet sound of someone deciding to shift positions. I looked up and the woman in the slate blazer had set down her water glass. She was looking at Renee not with anger but with the particular stillness of someone who has sat in a lot of important rooms and learned what silence can accomplish. Renee noticed and faltered slightly. Just a half second, but I caught it. My mother glanced toward the woman, then back at Renee. Something passed across her face that I hadn't seen in a long time. Uncertainty. Bryce cleared his throat. Okay, can we maybe? No, it's fine, Renee said too quickly. I'm just teasing. Jody knows I love her. The woman in the slate blazer reached for her water glass again. Slowly. Later I'd understand that she'd been listening to everything for the past 40 minutes. Not passively. The way an engineer listens to a structure. Looking for the load points. Looking for where things were held up and where they were about to give. Renee loved a crowd. When she felt one slipping, she grabbed harder. She pivoted to a story about our childhood, about a science fair project I'd supposedly ruined by being too slow, and then about how I'd never been the go-getter type. You know, some people are just different. Some people need more time. She wasn't judging. She said that last part while smiling at me in a way that made the people around her laugh again, because everyone understood that she absolutely was. My mother touched my arm across the table. Not in comfort, just pressure. A reminder that this was how things went and I should let it go. I took a breath. I looked at my bread plate. And then I looked up. The woman in the slate blazer was already looking at me. Not with pity, with something more specific. The way someone looks when they've been waiting to see what you're going to do. I gave her a very small nod. I don't know why. It just felt like the right acknowledgement of something neither of us had said out loud yet. I stood up. I hadn't planned to. My legs just decided. I appreciate the trip down memory lane, I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. But I want to make a toast, while I have the chance. The table quieted. Renee leaned back. My mother's expression was hard to read. I lifted my glass toward Bryce. I'm really happy for you. I mean that. I hope this next chapter is everything you've worked for. Then I set my glass down, and I said, very calmly, I also want to say for the record that I'm not behind the scenes anymore, and I think some of you are about to find out what that means. The table didn't know what to do with that. A few people smiled. A few didn't. Renee raised her eyebrows in a way designed to communicate that I was being dramatic. And then the woman in the slate blazer did something I didn't expect. She raised her glass toward me. Just lightly. Just enough. And that's when I understood that what came next wasn't going to stay inside this family. Her name was Viv. I found that out in the parking lot afterward when she caught up to me by my car. She didn't introduce herself as someone important. She introduced herself the way people with real authority do. She shook my hand, said her name, and asked if I had 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes. She was the managing director of a regional infrastructure development group, a private firm that worked alongside state and federal transportation agencies to evaluate and allocate construction contracts across the Midwest and Southeast. Biss said she'd worked with my consulting firm twice in the past 3 years on oversight projects. She said she'd had her team pull my name after reviewing the reports from the I-78 corridor project in Georgia last spring. I'd led the structural review on that project. 17 months of work. I'd flagged an issue in the preliminary design that saved the state an estimated $4.2 million in projected repair costs over the next decade. My name was in the report, not on a press release. In a report, Viv had read the report. She said her firm was expanding its talent pipeline and she'd wanted to meet me for 6 months but hadn't had the right introduction. She said she hadn't expected that introduction to be a rehearsal dinner in the suburbs. I asked her how she knew Bryce. She said she didn't. She was there as a favor to her colleague, who was Bryce's business partner. She'd almost canceled. She said she was glad she hadn't. We talked for 22 minutes in that parking lot. I know because I checked the time when we started and I checked it when she handed me her card. She offered me a senior consulting position at her firm, based in Chicago, with oversight authority on 3 active, state-level contracts. The salary was 63% higher than what I was currently making. The title came with a staff of 11. I thanked her. I told her I'd be in touch by Thursday. She said she expected I would be. Then she got in a black car and left. I sat in my own car for a while. The radio was off. I could still hear the restaurant through my closed windows, just barely, just the hum of it. Somewhere in there, my mother was probably pouring another glass of wine. Renee was probably wrapping up a story. Bryce was probably smiling at his fiancée and hoping everyone was having a good time. None of them knew what had just happened in the parking lot. I drove home and called my best friend who said, "Are you serious 6 times in a row?" And I said yes each time, and then I didn't sleep very much. I accepted Viv's offer on Wednesday, 1 day early. The wedding was 3 weeks later. I went. I wore a green dress and sat in the third row and cried a little during the vows, because weddings do that to me even when I'm not having a particularly sentimental year. Bryce looked genuinely happy. Tiffany looked beautiful. It was a good ceremony. The reception was where things shifted. I hadn't told anyone about the job yet. Not my mother, not Renee, not Bryce. I told my best friend and I told my landlord in Atlanta when I gave notice. That was the full list. Viv was not at the wedding or reception. That part was done, but Bryce's business partner was there. And at some point during cocktail hour, he found Renee and started talking to her. I was across the room. I couldn't hear what he said, but I watched Renee's expression change. It started as polite interest. Then it became something else. She glanced at me twice while he was talking. The second time, she didn't look away quickly. She came over about 10 minutes later. "Hey," she said. The tone was different. Still Renee, but missing something. The ease was gone. "Hey," I said. She held her champagne glass with both hands, which was new. Renee always held a glass with one hand. It was a power stance she'd practiced. Two hands meant something had disrupted her. "So," she said, "apparently you're moving to Chicago." "Apparently," I said. She waited for more. I let her wait. "Bryce's partner says you got some big offer." "With Viv Holloway's firm." She said the name like she'd just Googled it and was pretending she hadn't. I took a sip of my club soda. Why didn't you tell anyone?" I thought about that question for a second. Not the answer. I already had the answer. I was thinking about how to say it in a way that was honest and not theatrical. "Because," I said finally, "no one asked what I was working on. Not once. Not in years." Renee opened her mouth, closed it. "I'm not saying that to hurt you," I continued. "I'm saying it because it's true. Every time we were together, the conversation was about what you were doing, or what Bryce was doing. I was just scenery." She looked down at her champagne. "I got used to it," I said. "But I never stopped working." There was a long pause. A waiter passed with a tray. Outside through the venue windows, I could see the sun starting to drop. "The rehearsal dinner," she started. "I know," I said. I know, Renee." She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need her to. I understood exactly what she was going to say. She was just joking. She was just teasing. She didn't mean anything by it. All of those things were probably true in the way that things can be true and harmful at the same time. "The worst part," I said, and I hadn't planned to say this, it just came out, "wasn't what you said. It was that Mom smiled." And then she didn't say anything. Renee was quiet for a long time. "I know," she said finally. And something in her voice had changed enough that I almost believed her. "My mother found me at the end of the night when the dancing was winding down and people were pulling on their coats. She sat down next to me at a table near the back of the room. She smelled like Chardonnay, and her perfume she'd worn since I was 7. She said my name. Then she said, 'I heard about Chicago.'" I nodded. She was quiet for a moment. She smoothed the front of her dress. "I didn't know," she said, "that you were doing work like that." "No one asked," I said. "It came out gentler than I expected." She looked at her hands. "I should have asked." That was it. 4 words. Not an apology exactly. Not a full acknowledgement. But my mother was 72 and had spent 40 years inside a particular story about who her children were, and 4 words in the right direction was not nothing. I didn't cry. I'd expected to, but I didn't. "You can ask now," I said. She looked up. I gave her a small smile. She gave me one back. It was different from the smile at the rehearsal dinner. This one reached her eyes. We sat there for a few more minutes while the DJ played something low and slow for the last couples on the floor. Bryce and Tiffany were out there, turning in a slow circle. They looked tired and happy in that particular way of people who've just survived a wedding. I moved to Chicago 6 weeks later. A 1-bedroom apartment near the river with big windows and a building with a freight elevator. The kind of detail that means nothing to most people and everything to someone who has hauled her own furniture more than once. On my first day at the firm, Biff stopped by my office, a real office, with a door, and asked if I needed anything. I said I needed the files on the Meridian Overpass project. She said they were already on my desk. They were. I spent that first week learning the team, learning the active contracts, learning the specific way this firm communicated internally and externally. By the end of the second week, I'd flagged a discrepancy in the cost projections on a highway expansion project in Ohio, a rounding error that had compounded across 4 budget line items and overstated the contingency fund by just under $200,000. Not a scandal. Just a math problem that had been invisible because no one was looking at the right columns. I was looking at the right columns. Viv sent me a one-line email. "This is why you're here." I printed it out. I know that's an odd thing to do. I pinned it to the corkboard behind my monitor, not for motivation exactly, more as evidence. Proof of something I'd already known but hadn't been allowed to say out loud. Renee called me about a month after the move. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was unpacking books. She asked how Chicago was. I told her it was good, that I liked the winters less than I expected to, and the architecture more. That I'd found a coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment that opened at 5:30 in the morning, which was the closest thing to a love language I had. She laughed. Actually laughed, not the performed version. She said she'd been thinking about what I said at the reception. About no one asking. She said she'd talked to her therapist about it, which surprised me because I hadn't known she had a therapist. Renee always presented herself as someone who had things managed. "I think I needed you to stay small," she said. "I don't know if I knew I was doing it, but I think I needed you in that role." I sat down on the floor between 2 boxes of books. "I know," I said. "I figured that out a while ago. I'm sorry, Jody." She said it plainly. No qualifiers. No if you felt, or "I didn't mean to." Just the full thing. I held the phone and looked out my window at the river, which was reflecting the late afternoon light in a way that made it look briefly like something from a movie. I thought about saying something significant back. I thought about having a long conversation full of honesty and catharsis. Instead, I said, "Thank you," and meant it. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing much. She told me about a listing she was working on, a century home that needed foundation work. I told her what to look for. She took notes. At the end, she said, "I forgot you know about that stuff." "I know," I said. "You can remember now." After we hung up, I sat on the floor for a while longer. The light through the window changed. The city moved outside. All those lives in parallel, all of them carrying things no one at their family dinners knew about. I thought about the rehearsal dinner, the laughter, my mother's smile, the quiet sound of a chair scraping. I thought about Viv raising her glass. I've been in Chicago for almost a year now. My mother came to visit in the fall, her first time in the city in a decade. I took her to the Riverwalk and to a French place that does a good roasted chicken, her preferred order anywhere. She wore comfortable shoes, which was a concession she'd never have made 10 years ago. She asked me questions the whole trip, about the projects I was working on, about the firm, about what it actually meant to evaluate infrastructure. I explained the basics and she listened without interrupting, which was new. At some point, walking along the river, she reached over and held my arm. She didn't apologize. My mother is not built for formal apologies. But she asked, and she listened, and that was its own kind of language. Before she left, she said, "I always knew you were capable. I just didn't know capable looked like this." I helped her into the cab. I watched it drive away. The truth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't call ahead or wait for the right moment. It just keeps existing, quietly, in the work and the reports and the numbers in the correct columns, until one day a woman in a slate blazer reads a report from a project you'd almost forgotten. And everything that was always true finally becomes visible to the people who should have been looking all along.